With cities, it is with dreams. Everything imaginable can be dreamed, but even the most unexpected dream is a rebus that conceals a desire or, its reverse, a fear. Cities, like dreams, are made of desires and fears. Even if the thread of their discourse is secret, their rules are absurd, their perceptives deceitful, and everything conceals something else. There is no denying the idea that cities do exist in a very real sense. Our planet is jammed full of sewage systems, public transport, road networks, repair crews, school districts, etc. Beyond just the lines on a map, we've drawn a webbing of concrete scars across the globe. Everyone who lives in a given city must see the buildings, walk the sidewalks, touch the plants that undoubtedly, indisputably, exist. But these places on the earth are not the subject of this video. They are merely a port of call from which we will embark towards our true destination. We venture inwards, within the physical bounds of London, Jakarta, Santiago, or Istanbul, where a near infinite set of cities sit stacked one upon the other. For every urbanite inhabits their own distinct city, where steel and rebar bends to their unique experience of that sprawl. The parable of the blind men and the elephant describes a group of blind men discovering what an elephant is for the first time. As each touches a different part of the beast, tail, side, tusk, each ends up with a radically different idea of what it is, a rope, a wall, or a spear. Just like millions of blind folks trying to understand an incomprehensibly huge elephant, each member of a city's population gets a different perspective, an echo of the origin city with a population of one. These cities of the mind are our goal today, to view their topologies, untangle their intersections, and dissect their building blocks. I recently read the book The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. It's a wonderful book that charts a course of human history, from the Paleolithic through to the European invasion of the Americas. The Davids tally evidence of different sociological structures and governmental setups throughout the various societies, bands, kingdoms, and cities that grew across the planet in an attempt to create a new understanding of how humans have been conscious of our social worlds for far longer than many give us credit for. Of all the interesting elements of the text, there are many. What lingered in my mind was the way early urbanization was discussed. The idea posed is that cities, in their infancy, were a structural novelty, yes, but the mental basis for urban formation was far older than Ur. Suffice it to say, cities exist in the mind before they are born into the world. Isaura, city of the thousand wells, is said to rise over a deep, subterranean lake. On all sides, wherever the inhabitants dig long vertical holes in the ground, they succeed in drawing up the water, as far as the city extends, and no farther. Its green border represents the dark outline of the buried lake. An invisible landscape conditions the visible one. Everything that moves in the sunlight is driven by the lapping wave enclosed beneath the rock's calcareous sky. Consequently, two forms of religion exist in Isaura. The city's gods, according to some people, live in the depths, in the black lake that feeds the underground streams. According to others, the gods live in the buckets as they rise, suspended from a cable, as they appear over the edge of the wells, in the revolving pulleys, in the windlasses of the norias, in the pump handles, in the blades of the windmills that draw the water up from the drillings, in the trestles that support the twisting probes, in the reservoirs perched on stilts over the roofs, in the slender arches of the aqueducts, in all the columns of water, the vertical pipes, the plungers, the drains, all the way up to the weathercocks that surmount the airy scaffoldings of Isaura, a city that moves entirely upward. There is plentiful indication that humans throughout the Paleolithic had wide ranges of travel, and even wider webs of human contact. Similar instruments, tools, figurines, and funerary rites are found from the Swiss Alps to outer Mongolia. Looking even more recently at Aboriginal Australians or Americans, and even within contemporary groups, forager bands are not necessarily made up of closely related kin, but instead a wider pool of individuals, with maybe 10% being related. These complex forms of organization could extend extremely far, with an Australian able to travel halfway across the continent through people speaking completely different languages, and still find camps divided into the same kinds of totemic moieties that existed at home. Through these groups, and analogous clans in North America, hospitality and community were spread through a region stretching from shore to shore. At any given time, each human actually interacted with a very small subset of the people in this web of connections. But without these multitudinous systems of care, support, and trade, life gets a whole lot worse. David Graeber and David Wengrow propose that early cities were merely taking the setup and condensing the geography of things beyond any previous shrinking and division of cultural space. While this is a revolutionary move structurally, the Davids argue that the change actually had very little initial impact on the day-to-day activities and interactions of any given human. Just like a Paleolithic human and a modern city dweller, an early city dweller only directly interacted with dozens of their peers every day, while still living within a complex web of mutual dependence that spans thousands to millions. They just didn't have to walk as far as they did a few decades ago. Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino is a book of descriptions. We hear Venetian Marco Polo regale the emperor, Kublai Khan, with stories of cities throughout his crumbling empire, attempting to distract from ruinous clouds on the horizon. Many of the cities described by Marco Polo do not, nor have ever existed in our world, yet many have been inhabited by you or I. These cities are filled with desire, regret, lost days, and more deeply human experiences, honed to each their own central experiential theme. The book starts with cities that very well could be real, trapped in nostalgia or afraid of death. But as the book continues, the cities get more abstract, their structures Escherian and impossible, their core existences based in fairy tales. That central nugget from which each city sprouted remains, however. There is Isaura, bounded by its great underground lake and always moving upwards. There is Armilla, where buildings are made up of water pipes and rooms are empty, save for the nymphs that heckle any visitors from on high in their ever-flowing baths and showers. There is Valdrada, a city on a lake that is perpetually chained to the goings-on of its mirrored reflection. There is Zobeide, a city constructed and reconstructed by those who share a dream, yet can never fulfill its purpose. And yet I have constructed in my mind a model city from which all possible cities can be deduced, Kublai said. It contains everything corresponding to the norm. Since the cities that exist diverge in varying degree from the norm, I need only foresee the exceptions to the norm and calculate the most probable combinations. I have also thought of a model city, from which I deduce all the others, Marco answered. It is a city made only of exceptions, exclusions, incongruities, contradictions. If such a city is the most improbable, by reducing the number of abnormal elements, we increase the probability that the city really exists. So I have only to subtract exceptions from my model, and in whatever direction I proceed, I will arrive at one of the cities which, always as an exception, exist. But I cannot force my operation beyond a certain limit. I would achieve cities too probable to be real. When I read The Dawn of Everything, and thought about this philosophical, organizational underpinning of urban development, I thought about invisible cities. Graeber and Wengrow take a significant portion of the book to step through early cities, and the evidence that they still house. Some are iconic like Teotihuacan, or Ur. Others are just being excavated like the large circular megasites in the Ukrainian steppe. And some are especially important in a larger context of intentional cultural prioritization like the North American capital of Cahokia. These cities pose a harsher challenge to delve into because of our temporal distance from their period of life. The ruins we have to explore are a smashing of historical strata. Every era is conglomerated together into a tangled, false blueprint. Plus, nobody who witnessed the heyday of these early metropolises can give us context on their experiences. Evidence to describe the experiential aspect of these cities is sparse, and so to understand them, to describe them, can feel like Marco Polo deducing the cities of Kublai Khan's empire. It's not too far of a stretch to imagine a chapter of Calvino's book describing the city of Talyanki. It's an egalitarian paradise built in concentric circles, with near identical houses each having equal access to mutual aid through proximal neighbors, and self-determination through larger meeting houses in which to debate and decide city policy. Perhaps some more stylish or absurd details could be mined from this central theme, but I won't speculate here. These observations and inferences about the lives of those in Talyanki are drawn from other urban layouts of the era that we have more primary evidence on, and cultures from more modern times whose cities share a similar circular anatomy. But this vision of Talyanki is, ultimately, one that never existed on the planet, and is in fact quite new. It is perhaps at the bottom of the pile of now vacant burgs that lived in present-day Ukraine, constructed fresh from our minds with our own modern assumptions. We can only look around this facsimile at the cobwebs, and up towards the sky where we hope innumerable ghostly reflections still hold the truths of those who lived here over a millennia ago. After a 7 days' march through woodland, the traveler directed towards Baucis cannot see the city, and yet he has arrived. The slender stilts that rise from the ground at a great distance from one another, and are lost above the clouds, support this city. You climb them with ladders. On the ground, the inhabitants rarely show themselves, having already everything they need up there. They prefer not to come down. Nothing of the city touches the earth except those long flamingo legs on which it rests, and, when the days are sunny, a pierced angular shadow that falls on the foliage. There are 3 hypotheses about the inhabitants of Baucis: that they hate the earth, that they respect it so much they avoid all contact, that they love it as it was before they existed, and with spyglasses and telescopes aimed downward, they never tire of examining it, leaf by leaf, stone by stone, ant by ant, contemplating with fascination their own absence. The City in the City is a murder mystery novel by China Mieville. The detective aspect of the story is entertaining, but by no means special. Our hero identifies the victim, follows clues, traces suspects, but these are not the most interesting part of the book. The City in the City is probably the most spoilable of the texts that I am spoiling in this video. The simple yet extremely intriguing core concept of the book is one that you spend the first 30 pages or so figuring out, and that process of confusion begetting understanding is one that I would highly recommend. So if you haven't read the book and don't want this part to be spoiled, you can skip to this time code to avoid any spoilers. The titular city and city of the book are neighbors, Bezel and Ulcoma. Each has a different architecture, cuisine, languages, and more. But both cities share the same physical location. One large city, to an outside observer, is sliced and partitioned into 2 distinct halves. One is Bezel, the other Ulcoma. When in one half of the city, it is imperative to unsee anything or anyone from the other half, lest the mythical entities of Breach punish you for your transgressions. The twin cities of Bezel and Ulcoma take the disparate perspectives of city folk we've been talking about and forcibly smash them together in fragmented shards of overlapping existence. The arbitrary, jagged, almost violent lines between these 2 cities are a core timber of Mieville's writing throughout the text. And just like some of Marco Polo's cities, many of us have been to Bezel and Ulcoma at different times in life. At least to me, the unnatural separations feel authentic to the limits by which one can understand a place like a city, even after decades of residing there. The points where your experience ends and a newfound tourism begins are irregular and unnatural, untethered from the bounds of urban planning. Perhaps this is a better model for the individual cities of experience living within the brick and mortar of our physical world. Not a separated stack, but a million individual cities jammed into a single silhouette. Some streets exist in many of the cities, but each person is constantly inhabiting their small slice of it, unseeing the expanses around them. A glance at the background scenery may contain pieces of the many sister cities they've been forced to live with, to live around, but their unseen blur is only present in moments of reflection and can't be meaningfully comprehended. Pass through Copula Hall and she or he might leave Bezel, and at the end of the hall come back to exactly, corporeally, where they had just been, but in another country, a tourist, a marveling visitor, to a street that shared the latitude-longitude of their own address, a street they had never visited before, whose architecture they had always unseen, to the old common house sitting next to and a whole city away from their own building. Unvisible, there now they had come through, all the way across the breach, back home. The magic promised by Bezel and Ulcoma is the ability to see the familiar, the city, through another subjective view, getting 2 chances to feel different parts of the elephant. But the tragedy of the twin cities is that while one can hold 2 experiences of a place for the same place, they must necessarily be kept separate and irreconcilable. This tragedy isn't limited to the city and the city. Many spaces we inhabit or read about are necessarily deprived of their full richness because of our need to simplify stories. As humans, the experience of a city does not live in a vacuum. It stands in conversation with other places, and framed, remembered even, through narrative. Just as the cities described by Marco Polo each have a central thematic line, the cities in our minds are limited and trapped by the proliferation of narratives that we ascribe to them. I'm sure that the Isaura that exists is much more multifaceted than the one we hear about in Invisible Cities, and another visitor would only take another story and expand it to fill the empty streets of Isaura in their head. This process, while destructive of the true places we interact with, is simultaneously reflective. We recognize what is ours elsewhere, and thus the lack. Even Marco Polo's Venice has never existed outside of his mind. And as he sees more cities, he fears remembering Venice, lest it not exist anymore.